Hello there, sword fans. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. It is a Zeist Armory Connor Katana. Now, Zeist Armory is a company that went out of business before I started making these YouTube videos. It's no longer available for purchase, and frankly, they don't come up for sale secondhand very often. So you might ask, why are you making this video? Well, because this sword is cool enough in its own right, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to have it. So I thought, while I did have it, it was worth showing because it's a special, cool, and awesome sword. I don't know about you, but Highlander, the original movie, is my favorite in the series. Not that I mind the TV show or the other movies, but certainly the original was something special. At least it was in my mind, and it certainly fueled my interest as a younger guy in the hobby of swords and things like that, and inspired me to take up collecting and martial arts and other sword-related things. And so it has a special place in my heart for movie-wise anyway, and I think this sword is actually pretty cool. There's a lot of different Connor swords out there. You can buy Highlander swords. They're some of the most prolific type of swords out there, but very often they suffer from some dodgy quality, or they're overly expensive, or I don't know, there's a bunch of different stuff out there. I think this one is a reasonable balance of things and takes some artistic license in areas that maybe they should or shouldn't, but I like this particular sword, and it's unfortunate that Zeist Armory is no longer making them, because I think that they were making something special based on what I'm holding here. Now, I did buy this secondhand. The previous owner used it. This has some blemishes and imperfections that I don't know if were the case when they came out of the Zeist Armory store or shop, or however they were sold, but either way, it's still got some cool stuff. Anyway, I'm going to start with the top, the handle, and right away with this thing you're going to be able to see some of the fun and cool stuff, and namely all of the details. Now, it's not that it's perfect. There are little inclusions or pockets or air holes or something like that you might be able to see in the casting, but overall the casting is actually very, very detailed and intricate. You can kind of make out the roof of the dragon's mouth here, and there are some teeth, granted not sharp, but overall it's just very, very detailed, and I like that. It runs all the way along the entire length of the grip. The grip is also a little bit smaller in dimension in comparison to many Japanese swords, but generally speaking, this grip it stands out because it's just very ornate and detailed. A lot of times these are worn down, as was, I believe, the grip in the movie prop was worn down or artificially aged to simulate maybe years and years of use or something like that. But more to the point, it probably just hurt the actor's hands, which I can say this certainly does. I've moved this around and did a little bit of playing with it. The previous owner that had it before me cut at least quite a bit with it, but I haven't really cut all that much with it. Anyway, I can't say that when I move it around, this grip certainly wears into your hands quite a bit. It's not terribly comfortable. All of those little intricate details just bite right into your hand. The grip is not terribly rigid either. You might be able to see it has some flex. It's made out of some sort of softer resin, which is at least slightly pliable. Now, in the original film, the sword was dropped and the head popped off in like the final scene. So I suspect that this resin might be a little bit more forgiving, though it doesn't make me want to really chance it exactly. Anyway, you can see that it is much more ornate, I suppose, or at least the details are crisper and cleaner than you might typically find on some of these examples. But again, not that it is without flaw. You can spot that right here there's some discoloration, and this little black dot, I suspect, is actually the tang or the nakago of the sword, the metal underneath. And this handle, while it has a mikugi in it that I believe is just there for security, doesn't come off. I've tried, not granted very forcefully, but I believe this handle is pretty much just glued to it. So you can't take it apart if you were trying to clean it or maintain it or something like that. Along the back too, there is let me see if I can spot it. It's a tricky one to find. There is a slight something along the spine that almost looks like a crack, though I might have cleaned it off. Anyway, suffice to say, there is a slight ridge that runs along this area here, and it has dirt in it. It made me think that the actual handle was cracked, but as I looked at it more diligently, it actually looks like there's just a casting line where things came off center slightly. So it's not perfect. Little pockets, little inclusions, a little spot where you can see some discoloration in the tang, but at the same time, it's much more ornate. One of my favorites here is this little beastie guy up here. You can kind of make out some of the lines on the fur, which are just things that don't show up in some of the other swords. You can make out some of the faces along here, and along the trees on this spot around here. You can actually make out some of the bark, and it has like a texture to it, which otherwise is I don't know. It's just not something that I've seen on the other Highlander swords out there. A lot of these little details tend to be obscured. The dragon scales are also a lot cleaner and crisper. You can make out this pocket over here kind of looks like Samegawa or the ray skin on a traditional sword, but they're the dragon scales. Anyway, all in all, it's very detailed, very cool. That said, it does not feel good in the hand. So I've moved this around. I'll talk about moving it around later, but it is not a comfortable handle to move. It immediately presses into the hands, and so I could certainly see why one would wear gloves. When I reviewed the other one from Point Gallery, which was a much softer surface, it actually was uncomfortable on my hands. This is not something I would want to hold for hours, so I could certainly understand why the actors might wear gloves. That said, this is an ornate thing, and it's going to likely hang on the wall more than it's going to be used in any kind of dojo sense or in any kind of practical sense. So the fact that it's more detailed and I suppose looks the part or has some more fun bits and details to show is something that I appreciate. Something I for its primary purpose of sitting on a sword stand looking pretty, does the job. Now I'll move on to this kind of Fuchi area right here. Worth noting that there is a sharp ledge here. I did not notice that when I was actually using it, and I don't notice it when I handle it, but as I rub my finger along here, there is a sharp ledge, which is not ideal and would be something I would ding any kind of practical user piece on. Though again, when I move it around, I don't feel it in my hand. It doesn't bite me, so I guess that much is good. If I move on to the Tsuba itself, which you can kind of see here, these little kind of cutouts, which again do certainly look like the original movie sword, or at least it bears a striking resemblance. But these jetouts are sharp, and I ripped part of my thumbnail off. It got caught and pulled a bit of my nail off catching on these. They're not sharp enough to really cut into you, but certainly, have enough bite to cause some discomfort. And so I don't particularly like the Tsuba. It looks the part, but basically it looks like a big sheet of brass drilled out, which is what the original one looked like. It's, big and chunky and not ideal. The Tsuba also has a little bit of wiggle, and again, because I can't take the handle off, I can't correct the wiggle. I could wrap fishing line or, dental floss or something around there to fill it in, or super glue it, or do some sort of other homeownery kind of fix. But I'm not going to really bother doing that. It doesn't bother me that much, and I would rather not make it any worse than it already is. Before I move on to the blade, the scabbard is just one, actually from the $50 Musashi Katana that I broke some years ago. It just happened to look the part and fit, and it doesn't rattle, and it actually glides in and out reasonably well. It fits the sword pretty well, and it also has a middle fitting up at the top here. This sword is very, very sharp, and I'm nervous when I use it that I might cut myself or cut through the scabbard, so having a little middle bit on here is a bit of reassurance. Otherwise, it looks nice. I've tried other makeshift scabbards. I don't know if the one I got with it is original, but basically I don't think the scabbard was anything special, and this one was red and reminded me of the Ramirez scabbard. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the blade, the pointy stabby part, the part you're actually likely interested in. So this blade has some redeeming factors and some also kind of red flags. So towards the base here, the habaki looks like nothing particularly special, simple, basic. It fits the lines well enough and probably matches what's in the movie, but it's not particularly special. And these seppa look like they're about the cheapest. Well, it's what I usually see on the cheapest swords out there. The lines on this blade, though, are actually pretty nice. The shinogi is reasonably crisp. It's a little softer, I suppose, than it could be, but the flats of the blade are flat and even. And given that this is an older blade, and blades when this sword was made were a little more likely to be ripply all along the surface, that's at least a good sign for things being of a decent quality. The Yokote over here and Kisaki are reasonably well formed. It doesn't have the most definition, but it's all right. I have to be kind of careful because this blade is stupid sharp. The tip also has a slightly swelled area over here. Anyway, it's a reasonably well-shaped Kisaki area. The hamon on the blade is nice. Hopefully my camera will participate, and then you can kind of make out. It doesn't have the best polish on it, and it's also diminished from usage by both me and the previous owner. But I do like the pattern, and I like the hata on here. Hopefully you're able to see some detail here. I think the pattern on this is really quite striking and nice. Supposedly, this is a Soshu Kite, or a laminated 7-panel kind of steel. I have no idea if that's the case, and I can't really tell by looking. I don't see signs of that, but I don't know how I would identify if it is or isn't. If done well, it kind of blends together. So anyway, I do see signs of lamination, but I wouldn't know unless I broke the blade apart, and I don't want to do that. Anyway, it's supposed to be a nicer one, and supposedly these things ran from $400 to $4,000. I have no idea how much this one was, but I will say it's a very nice example. It's also exceedingly sharp, which I will talk about in a moment when I'm done showing this pretty pattern, which hopefully you're able to see. There's just, I don't know, there's quite a bit of detail in here. For being an older sword, this is really a very, very nice example. Anyway, you've seen this sword. I do like that this is folded. A lot of times the Highlander swords are not. They're made out of cheap kind of stainless steel. They might be sharpened, but they're not usually this sharp. Very few swords actually out of the box are this sharp. And the sword supposedly being folded 200 times in the movie, you know, that wouldn't necessarily result in a good sword. But being a folded blade with a nice hara, being at least having the characteristics of a Japanese style sword is a nice feature, and I certainly would like to see it on this sword. The higher amount of detail on the handle as well as the folding are some of my favorite features of this particular one. So I talked about the usage side of things. This is not a particularly fun sword to move around. I mentioned that it hurts the hands when you're moving it. For use in EI, it's not the best tool, though it's not necessarily meant to be. But I can use it. The blade draws fine out of the makeshift scabbard. I did hurt myself and pull my thumb nail on the Suba here, and it was not a fun experience. Anyway, not a good blade for EI. I don't particularly like the handle either, where the kind of the swell comes up. I don't like how it holds or fits in my hand. It hurts and feels oblong, and it just basically tells me to not hold on to it rather than to to try to grip it harder. It doesn't feel good. As an ornate object, it is really striking and pretty, but as a usage piece, it is not fun at all. That said, when I went to cut things with it, you know, this narrow handle is elliptical. It's very easy to index and tell where the edge is. It's very easy to keep the edge on line. The little swell at the point offers some feedback in terms of like the wind sound or hasuji or swinging, not necessarily a lot, but it actually cut the tatami, or not the tatami. I didn't cut any tatami for this video. I cut a pool noodle, and it cut the pool noodle really exceptionally well. My form is not that good, and it made me look better at cutting than I really am. So I would say that this edge is what lends itself to that. It's an exceptionally sharp edge, and the blade is overall pretty well shaped and easy to index. And so cutting with it is actually pretty fun. The previous owner had cut with it as well and said that it was quite a fun piece to cut with. So if you were looking for a functional Highlander sword that looked good on the wall and was ludicrously sharp to cut with, well then the Zeist Armory Katana Cat seemed to be the one. Not without flaw. Obviously there's some discoloration, some pockets, wiggly subas, and some cheap seppa. And I have no idea about the original scabbard, but overall, this is really quite a striking blade. Anyway, I find it unfortunate that Zeist Armory is not in the market of selling swords anymore, mostly because I don't see other swords that have this level of detail on the handle. You might be able to get one that has a folded blade. In fact, I bet Texas Steel Props or whoever's doing the stuff that Point Gallery used to would be able to put a folded blade on a Highlander handle. But I don't see them with this level of detail anymore. You might be able to. I guess I haven't looked out there very much. But this one is a particularly cool iteration, and I've enjoyed having it and handling it, and it's also really sharp and fun to move. Anyway, that's all I've got. Highlander was a fun movie. This is a fun sword. Hopefully the video was entertaining. As always, cheers, and thanks for watching.